Hello and welcome to Investment Insight. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button. Now let's break down what's happening in the markets today in a clear and simple way. So based on some recent analysis we've been looking at, we are taking a deep dive into an economic pivot that is happening over in China right now, and it is honestly massive.
Yeah, massive is probably an understatement. It's a complete structural overhaul.
Right. I mean, the mission of our deep dive today is to really understand what they're doing.
Hmm.
According to the data, they are trying to replace their old, crumbling real estate economy with this super high-tech, artificial intelligence and green energy economy.
And doing that without crashing the whole system in the process, which is the really tricky part.
Exactly. And the wildest part is how they're paying for it. Because they aren't doing what we're used to. They aren't just, printing a ton of money or slashing interest rates for everyone. So we're going to figure out how they are actually pulling this off, and more importantly, what this all means for you, the American listener, when you're looking at your own investment portfolio.
Yeah, it's highly relevant. But I think to really understand their new strategy, you kind of have to look at the immediate problem they're facing right now in 2026.
Right, the current slowdown.
Exactly. And, we're seeing this massive slowdown, but it's not happening evenly across the board.
Yeah, according to the data, it's being called a K-shaped recovery. And for anyone listening who might be a bit newer to that term, just picture the letter K in your head.
That's a great way to visualize it.
Right. So you have the top arm of the K, and that's pointing up. That represents the parts of China's economy that are doing great, like their export sector, electric vehicles, advanced manufacturing. But then you have that bottom arm of the K, and that is just plunging straight down.
Plunging hard.
Yeah. And that's their domestic consumption, private business investment, and obviously their real estate market, which is just a disaster right now.
It really is.
Mm.
I mean, if you look at the Q2 GDP growth for 2026, it was just 4.3%.
Which is below the 4.5% expectation, right?
Exactly. It's the lowest they've seen since late 2022. And the real estate numbers are just brutal. First half real estate investment is down 18%.
Wow, 18%.
Yeah, and overall fixed asset investment dropped by 5.7%.
Yeah.
So that bottom arm of the K is dragging the whole economy down like an anchor.
Okay, so seeing numbers like that, it brings up this thing that I like to call the fire hose fallacy, especially for us here in the U.S.
The fire hose fallacy. Okay, I like that. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, as American investors, we're so conditioned by how our Federal Reserve operates, right? Like, if our housing market dropped by 18%, what would happen?
The Fed would panic.
Exactly. They'd break the glass, pull out this giant financial fire hose, and just spray cheap money everywhere. They would slash interest rates to zero for everyone just to force people to borrow and spend.
Right, that's the classic Western central bank playbook.
But the data shows the People's Bank of China, the PBOC, they just aren't doing that. They are keeping that fire hose locked in the closet. I mean, they've kept their 1-year and 5-year loan prime rates completely frozen at 3.0% and 3.50% for, 14 months now?
Yep, 14 straight months of just holding the line.
Which just seems crazy to an American beginner looking at this. Why wouldn't they just cut rates to save the economy?
Well, it comes down to a couple of massive structural risks that they're terrified of. First off, a broad rate cut would really hurt bank profitability.
Because all their major banks are state-owned, right?
Exactly. If you crush the profit margins of your own state banks by forcing them to lend at 0%, you risk destabilizing your entire financial system. But the second, and arguably bigger reason, is the currency.
Ah, capital flight.
You got it. If they drop rates to zero while U.S. rates are higher, money is going to sprint out of China. Investors will sell the yuan, buy dollars, and seek better returns.
Which would just totally collapse the value of their currency.
Right. And a weak currency makes importing stuff like oil and food incredibly expensive. So that fire hose approach, it would cause way more problems than it solves.
Okay, that makes sense. But it leads to the obvious question. If they aren't using the fire hose to spray cheap money everywhere, how are they actually funding that top arm of the K?
They're using what you could call a drip irrigation system. It's incredibly targeted. And they do this through something called window guidance.
Window guidance, yeah. Based on the recent analysis, this is such a fascinating, uniquely Chinese tool.
It really is. It's not some official public interest rate cut.
Yeah.
It's basically unofficial instructions.
No.
The PBOC essentially gets on the phone with the big state banks and tells them exactly who is allowed to get loans and who gets cut off.
I love trying to picture this. It's like, okay, imagine a really strict bouncer at an exclusive VIP nightclub in a big city.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right. So you walk up to the velvet rope, and let's say you're a shiny new AI company, or maybe you manufacture solar panels. The bouncer takes one look at you, unclips the rope, and waves you right into the VIP section. And not only that, the bartender starts handing you super cheap drinks.
And in this case, the cheap drinks are subsidized, low-interest loans.
Exactly. Because the data shows green loans for eco-friendly businesses grew by nearly 20.8% in 2025.
Yeah, reaching a staggering 44.8 trillion yuan.
That is just a massive amount of money. And they're giving tech companies and small businesses special interest rate cuts too, right? Like 25 basis points or 0.25%.
They are. But let's go back to your nightclub analogy. What happens if a traditional real estate developer walks up to that same bouncer?
Oh, the bouncer just laughs and tells them to get lost. They are completely blocked from the VIP club. No cheap drinks, no cheap loans.
Exactly. And that shows us this isn't just about surviving a downturn. This is deliberate credit rationing. The Chinese government is intentionally cutting off the old economy to force a structural shift toward the new economy.
Okay, so let's talk about what's actually inside this VIP club that they want to fund so badly. We're talking about a shift from old infrastructure to new infrastructure.
Old infrastructure was concrete highways, empty apartment towers. It worked for a couple of decades, but it's totally tapped out.
And according to the data, new infrastructure is completely different. They're planning to spend about 7 trillion yuan in 2026 alone, and nearly 26.9 trillion yuan over the next 5 years.
It's an unbelievable amount of capital.
And this is all going toward things like AI computing centers, high voltage power grids, and green energy storage facilities, right?
That's exactly where the drip irrigation is flowing.
Okay, but I need to ask you about a rumor I read somewhere online because it sounds almost too convenient. The rumor is that they are just taking all these unsold, completely empty apartment buildings from the real estate crash, slapping AI tech and fiber optics into them and calling them smart cities to fix the crisis. Is that actually happening?
No, I'm glad you brought that up because I've seen that too and we need to debunk it right now. While you might have some random local city trying a small-scale renewal project, the central government's official macro policy is not smart empty apartments.
Right, because an empty apartment with smart tech is still just an empty apartment.
Exactly. The actual policy they have for the real estate mess involves a 300 billion yuan PBOC program. The idea was to let local state-owned companies borrow this money to buy up unsold homes and turn them into affordable public housing.
Okay, that sounds like a decent plan on paper.
On paper, sure, but in reality, only 16 billion yuan of that 300 billion has actually been used.
Wait, really? Barely any of it. Why?
Because the math simply doesn't work. Average rental yields in major Chinese cities right now are under 2%.
Oh, wow. So if a state-owned company buys the building, the rent they collect wouldn't even cover the cost of the government loan.
Precisely. They just bleed money, so they aren't touching it. The real estate sector is acting as this massive, heavy anchor that's just dragging down all these high-tech ambitions.
That is wild. And it actually sets up this bizarre paradox that the analysis points out. It's a classic liquidity trap.
A textbook liquidity trap. It's fascinating.
So we know the government is forcing money into this VIP club, right? The banks have all this cash because of the window guidance, but nobody wants to dance. Private companies and everyday households are just too nervous to borrow the money.
The confidence is completely gone.
I mean, the data shows things have gotten so extreme that banks were actually buying short-term commercial paper at interest rates as low as 0.01% just to meet their government-mandated loan quotas.
Yeah, let me just jump in and explain commercial paper real quick for our listeners.
Yeah.
It's basically a super short-term corporate IOU. It's not a long-term loan to build a factory. It's just cash to meet payroll for a few weeks.
So the banks are basically begging companies to take virtually free money for 30 days just so they can tell the government, hey, look, we made a loan.
Yes, it's just accounting gymnastics because businesses are too scared to take on real long-term debt.
To put this in an American consumer perspective, imagine you're looking to buy a house, right? The bank offers you a super low mortgage rate, but you genuinely believe the price of that house is going to drop by 20% over the next year. Are you going to buy it today?
Definitely not. You'd wait.
Right. Even with the cheap loan, you sit on your hands. It's a deflationary mindset. And then, on top of all this consumer fear, you have the local government suffocating under massive debt.
Oh, the hidden debt. This is the ticking time bomb.
Yeah, these local government financing vehicles, or LGFVs, the data puts this hidden debt at roughly 71.4 trillion yuan. That is over half of China's entire GDP.
It's an astronomical figure. For years, these local municipalities borrowed heavily through these shadow vehicles to fund local infrastructure projects, just to juice their GDP numbers.
Yeah.
But now the bill is due.
And so the government came up with a Band-Aid solution, right? This 10 trillion yuan debt swap program.
Right. The idea is to convert 6 trillion of this high-interest hidden debt into lower-interest official government bonds.
So they're essentially taking out a low-interest personal loan to pay off a high-interest credit card.
That's a perfect way to look at it. But here is the really crucial so what for investors. This debt swap prevents a total collapse of the local banks, sure, but it doesn't create any new growth.
It's just financial shuffling.
Exactly. Doesn't build a new AI center. It just buys them time.
Okay, so let's tie this all back to the American investor listening right now. How does China's internal pivot, the shift from concrete to computing, actually affect someone sitting at home in the U.S. managing their portfolio?
Well, the most immediate impact is a total shift in global commodity demand.
Right, because they don't need the same stuff anymore.
Exactly. Traditional construction materials like iron ore and cement are out. That super cycle is over. But the new demand is surging for copper, aluminum, fiber optics, server parts, cooling equipment, and specialized memory chips like HBM.
High bandwidth memory, yeah. That is super important for AI. And, looking at all this massive investment in AI, semiconductors, and green tech, we have to talk about the geopolitical context here.
Absolutely. It's
And
impossible to ignore.
because right now, under the current Trump administration, the U.S. has very strict tech restrictions in place.
Yeah. And China's massive investment is a direct response to those U.S. policies. They are acutely aware that they need strategic independence. They don't want to rely on a Western supply chain for their critical technology anymore.
Which makes sense from their perspective, but I want to point out a huge risk for American investors here, because it's so easy to read a headline that says, China is spending trillions on solar panels and AI, and think, oh, I should just buy a Chinese green tech ETF.
That is a very dangerous assumption to make.
Right. Just because the government is throwing money at a sector doesn't mean the individual companies are going to be profitable. If anything, that flood of cheap VIP club money creates a massive risk of oversupply.
We've seen it happen already. You get too many companies producing too many solar panels, and it triggers a brutal price war.
Exactly. The companies just bleed cash trying to undercut each other. So as an investor, you really have to do your homework. You have to look for the specific companies that are getting those direct long-term orders from the Chinese central government or the state telecoms. You want the companies that are insulated from the price wars.
That's a really solid strategy. You want the entrenched players, not the startups fighting for scraps.
Definitely. Well, this has been an incredible breakdown of a really complex situation. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I do have one lingering question that I think listeners should really mull over.
Oh, let's hear it.
If China actually successfully engineers this massive shift toward new infrastructure, could the future global leaders in AI and green tech end up being entirely state-directed, government-funded monopolies?
Wow. Rather than the free market startups we are so used to here in America.
Exactly. How will the Western tech world compete with a country that is treating AI development like a giant, heavily subsidized public utility? It's a completely different paradigm.
That is a really provocative thought to leave off on, and definitely something to keep an eye on moving forward. Thank you all for joining us for this deep dive. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button.